There we go.
Can you
Brooke,
hear
can
me
you hear
now?
me? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yay. How are you?
I'm good. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to kick off with an acknowledgement, and then Brooke and I will introduce ourselves, and we have a Q&A that we're really excited to share with you all. So Yama, my name's Dr. Amy Thunig, and before we kick off, I of course will love to acknowledge country. So if you are joining us from anywhere on the lands of so-called Australia, then you are on Indigenous lands, always was and always will be. I'm joining you all from Awabakal country, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. I extend that respect to Indigenous peoples who are joining us tonight, and of course to my sister girl, Brookie. So thanks to Booktopia, we have been invited to talk to you a little bit about our books. Brooke's has just come out earlier this month, and mine will be on your shelves in 2 weeks, and they've kindly put them up on the top of the screen to show you. But if you don't know me already, my name is Dr. Amy Thunig, and most of the time I'm an education academic. So I teach teachers how to teach is my bread and butter. I'm a Gomori person, and I have my very first book, which, like Brooke, it is a memoir coming out in 2 weeks. And if you know me, it might be from joining Brooke as one of her guests on The Bachelorette last year, where I drilled down on her final 2 suitors. Brooke, did you want to introduce yourself, please, my love?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for joining. My name is Brooke Blurton. I am a proud Noongar Yamaji woman from, my grandmother's line is from Noongar country, Balladong country, actually in the southwest of WA, Western Australia. And I'm actually not on country. I'm actually in Naarm, and I would like to obviously pay my respects as well to ancestors, and also pay my respect to elders, past, present, and extend that respect equally the same back to you, Amy, and back to my ancestors who have put me in this place of, being able to talk to you. So yeah, I am got youth worker background, not as impressive as Amy, but I also have done some advocacy work, but mostly, people will know me from being last year's batch, and then also now a author of my own memoir. So I'm really excited. Thank you, Booktopia, again. And I'm excited. I haven't seen you in a very long time, Ames.
Yeah, it's been a while. It has been a hot minute. We have both been so busy, and we do live in different states, which is, I guess it's one of the joys of all the technology we have is, we can call up and we can FaceTime with friends, but it's not the same as being in each other's homes and having cups of tea together. So I have a list of questions here, which I'll voice the question, but then we're both going to answer. And I'm so excited to share this with you all. So yeah, thanks to Booktopia for asking us to do this. It's such a joy to be able to do things with a friend as well. So the first question is, what led to you writing a book? Or why did you want to write a book? And maybe what was your inspiration to write the book? So Brooke, do you want to kick us off?
Of course. I feel like I definitely manifested writing a book. I, in high school, was really interested in English and creative writing, and I was actually relatively good at it. My nana loved storytelling, and I would sit and I would listen to her always telling the longest yarns ever, and I would sit there all day, every day, and just listen. And so for me, it was about being able to express myself. The book is called Big Love, and it's my memoir about my life, but it's also about reclamation. Being in the media for the last 4 years, a lot of my story has been told by other people. And so I kind of wanted to use and have this opportunity to write my own story, and it be factual to how I would tell it, and it not be twisted and turned into a tabloid or exploited. So this was my way of being able to take it all back and say, this is my story, this is my truth. You can't twist this. It is in its finest form, and it's in a physical form. And yeah, I think that's probably what motivated me in some way, was that that little fire in my belly that was like, I'm so sick of people twisting my words for clickbait. So, and then also, I guess, explaining my past growing up and my childhood, and going into that into more detail, and explaining, it has its complexities, but it also has its really beautiful history. And I am really proud of my culture and my heritage, obviously. And so, yeah, that basically is what inspired me to write the book. It wasn't easy, as you can imagine. Probably the process more so than I have. So this is also new for me. But I guess I'm just really proud to have written it, and it be in such a, yeah, it's be right there. I can look at it now. What
Yeah,
about you,
fantastic.
Ames?
Yes, so I'm just going to shut my window. It's getting a bit cold here. So for me, I think like I had gotten into my academic role, and I started to find that when I would do things like maybe go on television or go on the drum, and I'd be talking about education or politics, people weren't too bad at accepting that I'm Indigenous, like people outside of the Indigenous community, particularly people who've met me, because I'm really tall. Like, I do have some distinctive features to my nation group, but what people really struggled with was just assuming that I was from a really privileged background. And I found myself having to have quite a few conversations where people would talk to me thinking that I'd gone through private schooling, that I'd had a really privileged upbringing, or that when I spoke about things like incarceration, that I didn't have any lived experience with criminalization or police violence or anything like that, that I was just speaking from a theoretical standpoint. And
Yeah.
it started to get really tiring, not just having to speak up, but also trying to decide when I do and when I don't. And it was the same with things like if I was on a panel and topics like sexual assault came up. And I noticed last year as well, there was a bit of a push where I did see people kind of saying, oh, people who've experienced sexual assault should have to disclose it if they're on a panel. People need to speak up about these things. And I got really worried, like you're saying about that control. Like, these are really hard things, that some of the things that I've seen and experienced as a child and as a young adult, and that I've had to go through to get where I am, are like just flat out trauma. And so when you're in business mode or academic mode, or you're trying to talk about, some important data, trying to make those decisions of, well, when do I say, oh no, like I grew up, like my dad was a bank robber when I was a kid, or no, I've seen police violence firsthand, or like this is something that I've lived through, or well, I have been sexually assaulted, I don't just want to talk about it right now. And I just realized that image of people who have platform or who are academics, people don't want to connect that maybe you haven't had a really glossy, shiny upbringing. And then when I did take the time to explain to people that was part of my story, people would assume I didn't talk to my family, that we didn't have a connection, which just isn't the case. And so then that made it more complicated. And I realized these are stories that are missing. People who are impoverished or are experiencing systemic disempowerment in this country are treated as invisible. And I kind of want to like, I'm not that invisible now. So can we talk about this part of the story and the love and the complexity that lives there? And so it was so great to partner with UQP, who are my publishers. They really held that space for me to tell my story in my own voice. And yeah, so that's why I did it. It's to speak to that space that I think isn't really well covered in our society.
I completely, I resonate with some of those points so much, because I think from the outside, if you look a particular way, people will assume and people will judge, and I think that's also kind of takes me to the cover of my book as well, like being like so fun and fresh and happy. But a lot of the things that I talk about in the book aren't always fun and happy. And I'm actually okay with like talking about them. Can I ask you a question? That I've actually not read your book yet, and I've just got it literally like a day ago. And I'm so intrigued to know what the title, tell me again, means.
Yeah, so So my book is a series of short stories, essentially. So you can read it in one sitting, like back to back, but you can also just read a chapter as a standalone story. And when I originally wrote each story, they all had their own little title. And when I was back and forthing with my editor about, you know, do we keep them named or not? One of the titles I was really attached to was regarding the complexity of when I had my first child and realizing that everything I thought about the day that I was born wasn't correct. My parents coming and being honest with me and saying, actually, what we told you about the day you were born isn't true. And actually, when you were born, you're addicted to heroin. Like you've had addiction issues and you were born smaller than we'd said. And like mum's birth story wasn't actually the birth story I'd grown up hearing. And I was almost due to have my first baby. And it was just so mind shattering, like, oh no, I thought I was going to have this super easy, quick labor because that's what mum had said she'd had. But like mum was under heavy substance abuse when she gave birth to me. So that's why that had been her experience. But that title, like the title of that story was Tell Me Again About the Night I Was Born. Because it was that, you know, and I think people love to hear the story about, you know, the day their family met them in whatever form that took. And
actually, I read the start of your first chapter actually, and I was reading and I saw that you were talking about like your talking to your child, and then I saw the title in the name. So I'm so excited because, you know, I'm so excited obviously talking to you now, but at the same time I'm like, I just kind of like want to go and like find out more. So you've already got me so intrigued. And obviously, like, I can't imagine how even difficult that process of like bringing so much stuff to surface as well. Writing the book is always so difficult. But you share so like candidly, which has like always been such an amazing trait that you've had. And I always I admire that about you. And also I feel like it's so weird that we were, you know, okay, you came on The Bachelorette with me to support me as my friend, but at the same time, you made such an awareness to acknowledgement of land and country, and that people don't really know that. And that's always been such a beautiful thing that I carry in our friendship. When people ask me about you, I'm always like, this is what she did, this is what they did, and like I'm like, go watch it. Like go watch the second last episode and like see. And like it's crazy because there's so much complexities, right? I feel like there's so much complexities to my story, but I was able to like actually properly articulate them in the book. And like really dive deep.
Title. Like, how does your title link in with, like, why did you name yours Big Love?
Well, funny enough, actually, it's probably like on the opposite of you, is that in some way I'm not so tall. I'm actually quite little. And Big Love for me was, so I'm not very big in size, but my heart and my intentions are always really big. And so I've always been really motivated by love, and that doesn't just come from like love in relationships. It was about love from my family and my communities and my culture, and I never went without it. And so for me, it encapsulates like everything that I am motivated by. You know, love for my job, love for young people, love for community. And so I just felt it was very fitting to have Big Love, because that's something that I'll just continue to have and be. And yeah, and I just laugh because it's really ironic that I'm not very big. And so, yeah.
You have such a presence. Like, I always forget, like, for those of you watching it at home, because we're in different rooms and the screens are making us look comparable, Brooke and I are actually exactly 1 foot apart. Like, I am a full foot taller than Brooke because I'm on the taller, like, I'm over 6 foot tall. But I always forget about our size difference when we hang out. And then in photos, I'm like, oh my God, we are so different in size. Like, our stature's so different. I just forget. Like, your presence and the way you love is so big. So your title is so fitting. I love that. I was actually wondering, now your hard copy hasn't arrived to my house yet, but I do live semi-regionally, so things always take a lifetime to get to me. But your publishing team were kind enough to send me a PDF, and I did start reading it today. I was actually wondering if you could share a little excerpt, a little taster, for those who haven't yet got your book. And both of our books are available for immediate order for Brooke's and pre-order for mine in the link in the bio, so Booktopia's bio and our bios. But Brooke, do you want to give us a taster of your book, of what Big Love is for you and what the reader's going to get if they purchase your book, when they purchase your book?
Absolutely. And that also reminds me, I have a question for you. So I'll talk about the cover. So the cover is obviously my Big Love.
I love your cover.
It's a photo my best friend took, who I saw over the weekend, Jared Sang, and he is like an absolute angel, and he's been there for me like so much. The artwork's actually my own, that I did in COVID times, so you can see the actual original excerpt on the back.
Amazing.
So it's, yeah, so this painting was called Mob and Family, that I did in COVID times when we were in lockdown. So my favorite excerpt is, or favorite part of the book is this chapter at the end, and it's, I don't know, when I was writing this, I just felt like it was everything. I could articulate everything, what I meant, like in the book, in life, in general. Okay, let me go. How am I getting nervous?
We're like it's story time together. I can't wait to listen to you.
Okay, so actually, there's another bit that I'd actually, hang on, let me just see whether I rather list this bit. Hang on, because there's so much of it that I could tell you, but I've only got a short period of time. Sammy, which one should I read? Sorry, my friend's here. I think I'll read. Okay, I'll read the last chapter. Okay, so love is the most infinite and effortless presence in this world. It's found in the tiny crevices of human nature. It's not all grand gestures and moonlight cruises and song and fanfare. Love is in the little things, in the ordinary parts of our extraordinary lives. It's found in hospital rooms and grocery stores, in home-cooked meals, and in the smiles of passing strangers. Love is in the music you listen to and in the jokes you make, and it's in the way a part of you is always living on country, and how country will always be waiting to welcome you when you return. Love is, are you okay, and get home safe, and did you have enough to eat? It's in the feeling of being completely at ease with someone, because being happy just feels normal after a while. The best kind of boring, the best feeling of security, when you are loved unconditionally. Little one, you don't need to worry about love. It's all around you, every day and every moment. It can reach you at your best, and it will meet you at your worst. There's no force in the world stronger than love. Big love. So, yes, that's my little part.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, that gave me like little goosebumps. That was so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Anytime. It's my favorite bit because it just describes like what I would tell myself and what I would tell my younger self. And if you read the book, you will understand that that's a message that we need to hear sometimes.
I liked the part about the boring, like how boring is good.
It can be.
But it can be charming. I love that. Thank you. The part that I'm going to share. Now, I was going to say, like, I think it would be very easy for people to want to demonize people like my parents. And I think the counter to that is the purpose of the book.
Yeah.
And basically that complexity of harshness and love and difficulty and struggle being woven in with love and life is natural, actually. Like, we see it everywhere else. So the extract that I'm going to share, it's in chapter 16 of my book. Tell me again. Oh, now I feel nervous. Why are we getting nervous reading to each other? Okay.
It's very on the spot, you know, so I get
Like,
it.
like we're in Year 9 English and we're waiting for our lines to come up to read out loud.
Yeah,
Yeah.
literally.
I've heard people say that nature knows best, that animals don't rush or stress or worry. They just are. But I suspect people who talk like that understand little about what they call the natural world. I watched a documentary once on orcas. They kill and torment other creatures for fun. The film showed orcas chasing this whale and her calf for days and days, for as long as it took to exhaust the mother whale so she could no longer protect her baby. They killed the calf, not to eat, just because. Then they swam away, leaving the mother with her now dead baby, and she visibly mourned that baby for days. Even when she eventually swam away, I don't believe she let that moment go. It's white people nonsense to say that nature doesn't grieve and mourn, that nature isn't cruel. We are no less nature than those whales and orcas. Sometimes I can't tell if my mother is orca or whale. When I was a child and she was enraged, I felt like the mother whale, under attack for days and trying desperately to just escape. But as an adult, when she is angry, I see her as the mother whale, and her demons and unmet needs are the orcas attacking her and breaking her down relentlessly until she's left with nothing except the task to grieve. And she doesn't grieve. She erases, ignores, and throws out the comment, "It's only a big deal if you make it one." So it's a bit of a dark, dark taste, but I loved my mother dearly. My mum recently passed. She's very sad, actually. I kind of regret bringing that up during the chat. But that complexity of sometimes we're the orca, sometimes we're the one who wants our pound of flesh, and sometimes we're the one that's under attack. And that is human nature, just as it's what's around us. Like if we actually pay attention to the life that goes on around us and not just a human-centric view of the world, we can learn so much. So that's a little taste.
Oh my God, you're gonna make me cry.
I know we both
look at us
lost, right? Like that's so sorry. That was a big off me.
No, please don't over apologize. It's I mean, I think I learned through the process that like grief really matters. And you know, you did go through a very hard experience losing your mum recently in that process of like writing the book, and you know, I am really proud of you for doing that first of all, and then I know that she would also be equally proud of you for getting it done. And you know, and I do truly believe that you are right, we could be the ones under attack, or could be the ones wanting flesh. I feel like you said before, our parents could be easily demonized, and I tried not to do that in a way that, you know, give my mum's not around either, as you know, and I wanted to tell her story through big love, and also my grandmother's story. But there's some stories that you keep close to your heart and sacred to yourself, and you choose ones that you do want to share with the world, well and truly knowing that you're putting it out there and that it's for everyone to see, and that you're also giving yourself a part of yourself out there too. And that's really difficult and really hard. I know haven't read yet, so I don't know, you know, much about who you talk about in the book, but how did people respond that you spoke about in the book to you telling the story about them, or them being a part of it? Was it really positive, or?
Yeah, so before I agreed to like pitch the book, before I decided to pitch the book, I actually spoke to my parents about it. So my mum only passed 8 weeks ago. It was very recent. But I started the process of the book 2 years ago now. And I spoke with my parents about it, and I said to them, this is my idea. I'd like to tell our stories from my perspective, like, but I want you to be part of the process. Like, if I write stories and you're in them, I want you to read them before I send them to the editor. I want to know that you're on board with it. And so my parents were fully on board. And my dad was with me. Like, he came around for the day that I signed the contract so that he could be part of that. And my mum read the entire book before she passed, and she loved it. And that might surprise people. Like there are some really hard stories in here, but my mum told me that it felt like when she read it, it felt like having her life remembered, like stories around a campfire. Like it was this idea of her storying would live on. And when she was unwell in the hospital this year, he had this sampler, like the first, so something that editors, publishing houses do, for those of you watching who aren't writers, they make little versions of your book with, like, say 3 or 4 chapters or 5 chapters, and they circulate it before the whole book comes out so that booksellers know what to expect. And my mum had that sampler, and she used to make the nurses and the doctors read it, because that was the complexity of my mum. Like she knew her flaws and her faults, but she loved us with everything that she had. And there are some lovely stories in here as well about her. But anyone that's written about in my family in the book, like obviously there are examples of assault in here, and I didn't get their permission. But all of my family, they've read what they're in, and they've like all given their blessing for those stories. But my siblings did ask to be given pseudonyms, just so that people didn't feel like they knew them too much just through the storying. So my name, my parents and my grandparents' names are all correct. I never name my children in the book, and my siblings all got given pseudonyms just to protect their privacy, because I'm the one doing publicity and you know, fronting them. They shouldn't have to. But what about you? Like, what was your process for permissions? Not because we don't really need, you don't need permission. It's about seeking it if you choose to. And I chose to for my reasons. What about you?
I did the same. When I was first thinking about it, and anything that I do, like my family we're so transparent with one another. Really lucky that I've got only, you know, I've had actually a lot of loss in my family where I don't have mum and nan around, and dad's not, I have got an adopted dad. And so when I chose to do like The Bachelorette, or I chose to do, you know, tell stories, like they knew all the stories that I was telling and they're okay with it. So it was nice to have their, like, you know, blessing to tell not only our story growing up, but also like mum and nan's. And so, you know, the little bits that I wrote about them, I sent to them as well, and just said, hey, like, do you mind if I tell you, you know, my brother at one point in the book, you know, he chased me around and tried to bloody stab me with a butter knife. And so, yeah. So I was like, okay, I don't want you to, like, you know, make you out to be this like aggressor or anyone. And so, you know, if I make it in like a lighthearted story, you know, would you be comfortable with me telling it? And he was like, yeah, that's all right. Like, like that's fine. Like, because he knows he's not like that. And, you know, it's funny because, you know, that's what partly our childhood was, it was like growing up, was just like us teasing one another and us fighting and stuff like that, just like normal, you know, siblings do. And I got some really great feedback, obviously, from my adopted dad, my stepmom, who is a huge part of it as well. She's in it. And Joe, who was a big part of it, who was an ex-school teacher of mine, that really showed me unconditional love and support. And she loved it. And so I was really happy that I could show them, one, I could, you know, go back to Joe and say, look what I've done, because she's one of the biggest influences that have got me to where I am now. And my stepmom has had my back, you know, since I was like literally like 19 months old. And so, you know, our relationship is quite complex as well, but she was saying she had a nice little kind of like, it made more sense to her about our relationship, which is actually really nice. And so, yeah, I think it is a very hard thing to, like, you know, feel like you don't want to upset anyone in any way. Not that you have bad things to write about them or anything like that. It's just like you don't want to upset anyone, or like taint how they view themselves, etc. Like, yeah. But that I think that was probably one of the most difficult things, was just choosing which story to put in the book. That's an
important part of the process, right? And that's
yeah.
about you saying like your stepmom then found that she understood the dynamic better. Because like I found it interesting when because I was so worried. Like I had a little brother who passed away, and I write about him in the book, and we don't, like, as a family, my family don't talk about him. And so one of the things I was really worried about was like taking that story to mum, and I was like, mum, like it's got Michael, my little brother, in it. And I remember giving her that story, and it was the same with dad, like, you know, because there's overdoses, there's raids, there's arrests, like pretty full on stuff. And I remember my dad saying and my mum saying, like, where's the effect of you remember it kinder than we feared? Like they got to see the way I see them through the writing, and actually I think they had been beating themselves up more than they needed to. Like they thought that I remembered it harsher, or that I didn't remember the joy, or that I didn't remember the love. And when they got to read it, they were like, oh, this is like, you remember it with kindness, and we weren't kind of expecting that. And I thought, oh wow, like it actually was better than I thought. Like there was, it was really loving. Like I love that was part of the experience for you too, that it added perspective and depth, because these are things we wouldn't often talk about in adulthood. Or maybe if we try to, it might end up in an argument, whereas you just give it to them to read, it's easier.
Agreed. Yeah, exactly. I totally agree. Like it's like providing a perspective that you didn't know or understand. Like my brothers really don't rarely read things, and I don't really overly communicate them, you know, communicate with them like how you're going, like what's up, but what's going on in my like head, or what's going on in my inner dialogue, they don't know what that looks like and what that sounds like. And so they reading it, they were like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And we also have all the same memories as well. Like I was, when I was writing about something and I checked it with my brother, he was like, oh, I have that same memory. And that was like really nice, because I thought I was the only one that remembered it in our family. And I remember it so clearly and so vividly. And he was like, no, I like remember, like, you know, what the day was like, how the weather was. And I'm like, oh, and it sort of like validates that, you know, we all share very beautiful memories, even though some parts of it is not so beautiful. But, you know, we all have that we're still holding on to those beautiful stories that my nana told, or what we, you know, experienced with our mum growing up and stuff like that. Did it your cultural, like your heritage, your background, your First Nations identity, like did that impact the way that you had written and wrote?
Yeah, I would say definitely. I think probably the way we perceive time and the way we connect with country and one another. So community, family, and country, like obligation, law, and love.
Yeah.
Because it influenced the way I grew up. Like, you know, my grandfather is such an important part of my life and has been from day one. And he's in so many of those key formative stories. And he's an Aboriginal man. And just the way I think as a kid, I could see where I was going to end up as an adult. And as an adult, I see myself as a child still. Like there's those circles and cycles. And I remember what I really appreciated about my editor was when I said, like, this is how I'm going to write it. Like at times the story will dip to child view and then back to adult view, because that's how energy moves in my understanding of energy and life and time. And so I think that comes through in the way the stories are paced and written, because that's how I see the world. And my editor was totally happy to support me with that. I just had to explain a few things. But yeah, I think it's just woven in there, right? Like in the same way. And we've talked about this. I remember a couple of years ago when we were hanging out, and you made a comment to me, like, you're like, you know, I didn't realize you were queer. Like it was just one of those things, like, you were like, oh, I didn't realize. And I was like, I think I said something like, well, it's probably because I've like not tried to sleep with you. Like it was one of those, like, it's a core part of who I am, but it's not front and center in like what I put forward. But like, you know, crushes on girls in primary school, and like the fact that I'm not straight is in the storying, like it's woven within. And I like, and same with like indigeneity and you know, doing things with my like grandpa, like fishing, and the way I was taught to respect and respond to country is woven in there, because that was how I saw the world as a child. It's how I see it now.
Exactly.
So it's just woven in. Like, I think it would be hard to write it in a way that didn't show it. What about you?
Yeah. I mean, I'm the same. I feel like I didn't feel like I needed to explain things into like a sort of westernized way, like, and then this happens, and then, you know, I kind of was just explaining the situation and the scenario, and then being like, look, this is what happens, this is the experience. It's sometimes like very, sometimes it can be really crappy, and then sometimes it's like, you know, but it's made me who I am. And kind of like from hindsight and from a perspective where I was like, you know, obviously the theme is big love. And I've always, you know, I've always been really loving of being outside in country, and that's just who I am, and that's just shaped me for who I am. And so you can sort of again see that throughout the book as well. And that comes from my nan. So it comes from, you know, our bloody beautiful families. And the story of my nana, which is my favorite, I just actually, like, I never really articulated how much I love my nana. I haven't been able to do that, but the book has been really helpful in reminding me how strong she was, and then also where I get that strength from. I think I thought it was, you know, from my mum, and it is obviously, but I think my nan was the biggest influence in my life. And so my First Nations culture comes from her, and how, you know, she didn't always wanted to talk. She didn't want to talk about things that had happened to her in her life, because she, you know, felt like she needed to protect me, and protect us. And I actually value that so much more, because it gives me so much more respect that she went through probably a lot more than I could ever imagine. But she showed us so much love and compassion, and she was the one that gave me my totem. She's the one that gave me connection to my culture and my country. And she also, like, taught me the values that I needed. So, you know, to look after my family, to look out, you know, for everyone, and also look out for myself. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I think also like talking about, I guess, the Black experience is what I would say in some way, sometimes is so, like, I guess, complex in some ways, that I found really difficult to talk about racism, and things that, you know, my family experienced, and some things that I went through when I was younger. But I was like, you know what? I think people need to hear it. I think people absolutely need to hear it. And I wasn't actually afraid to actually just kind of like hone in on it, and then just kind of voice my opinion. And so that, you know, I was like, it's my book.
Right. You've got that
I was like,
control.
it's my book. Yeah. So that was also like a really great process to sort of, like, I've never, you know, I talk about like the same what you brought up at the, you know, at the start of this chat, was people kind of judging you from the start and assuming that you're something that you're not, and you being like, well, and you know, there's parts of you that like question yourself, but you're like, no, 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 actually, no, this is who I am. And that's definitely across the book as well. So I'm really happy about it. I've
Wonderful.
got another question. Obviously, I'm the same, you know, like, if it wasn't for The Bachelorette or The Bachelor, my queer identity probably wouldn't be the forefront as well, equally. Like, I was always really progressive in a way that I thought love is love. Who cares? You know, if you want to love someone, like, I just kind of had this mentality of not giving a shit about who loves who. And I'm really lucky. I think that comes from my mum, and actually also having a lot of independence growing up. And you'll notice that that's just my open mind now. And so for me, if it wasn't for the shows, that people probably wouldn't know that I was queer, or that I was, you know, bisexual, but I'm more identify with being pansexual rather than bisexual. And I described that in the book. And unfortunately, you know, with the shows like The Bachelor and Bachelorette, they have to confine to a particular box, because that's just mainstream TV, and that's what, you know, what they have to do. It's like technicality kind of thing. And so, you know, I feel like I was able to explain my sexuality and explain my thoughts around that. And that was actually quite liberating, because I felt like, you know, a lot of people have assumed that this is what I am, and actually, no, this is what I am. And
yeah, and we've talked about that because we're both pansexual. So if you don't know what pansexual means, it's like attraction across the gender spectrum. So like as a non-binary person, and as someone who's like Brooke and I both are attracted to people if they're non-binary or male or female, like however they identify is secondary to our attraction to the person. I think like I love that you've had that opportunity to fully explain it, because we talked about, you know, using the term bi on the television. Obviously it's a better known term than pan. And I remember like sometimes I was in situations where like I would say, oh, Brooke's pan, and then they'd be like, actually she's bi, and I'd be like, I don't want to argue with you, but she's actually my friend, like, but anyway. And then I'd be like, why am I even arguing with this person? But it's that idea about purpose. So I just feel like because like I'm also disabled, right? And like sometimes it'll get out there that like, you know, I'm autistic and I'm also physically disabled, but it's not visible. Like I have fibromyalgia, and people just love trying to make you the voice of things. And because like we tick a lot of boxes, right? Like Indigenous, queer, I'm also disabled. Like people are like, oh, you're like a threefer, not even a twofer. And it's like, yeah, but I'm not a scholar in queer studies. Like you can be someone who is personally queer, but the history of queer community and the fights that have had to happen, the work that continues to have to happen.
Yeah.
There are some phenomenal people in the space. And for me, I don't make it too obvious. I mean, I've made it more obvious over the last few years because I went from being married to being single, and I was like, oh, I hope people know that it's not just straight men that I'm interested in. But yeah, it's about as well, like I didn't want to take up space. I didn't want to have to keep saying no to being invited into places when actually there's phenomenal like people who have, you know, gone and done that hard work in activism. And it's the same, like you were dating on television. Like what you did was a big deal and opened you up to a lot of hate. And that was work for you. Like it made so much sense. Like there was so much purpose in you opening up and sharing, and also so much responsibility put on you. I suppose like one of the questions that we got put on was like, do we see ourselves as responsible or representative of those communities? So Indigenous and or LGBTIA plus communities. And when it comes to being Indigenous, like I feel like both my identity and the work that I do intersects in a way where I don't think I have a choice. Like I think my obligation is such that I have to assume I'm being taken as representative, so I have to act accordingly. Whereas being in the LGBTI plus community, it's like that is something that most of the time I just refuse to talk about. Like that's just for me. I want to keep that personal, but I only have the right, like I only have the ability to do that because so many other people have done and continue to do the hard work, including yourself, taking that mantle on the back to you. So what about you? Like, do you consider yourself representative? Do you feel like you have no choice, or are you able to say, no, I'm not?
I mean, I just feel so proud that we were able to do, I guess, a queer bachelorette, and that, you know, a lot of people won't, you know, understand the gravity of it all, and because they don't really understand maybe what it's like to be queer in Australia, in, you know, society, because maybe they aren't or they don't identify. But I feel like I do feel responsible because, again, like what you were talking about before, it just kind of comes as nature for people to assume that because you do tick all those boxes that you do have to act accordingly. And I feel very proud to do that. I'm very honored that I, you know, was able to showcase that on the show, but then also represent my communities. But it's a lot of pressure all the time and I know that I don't always get it right, and I'm okay with that because I'm not perfect and I don't try to be. And I feel like, you know, my book has been able to express what that experience was like and how it sort of came about, and how I kind of came to terms with my sexuality and realizing that, hey, I actually I'm not hetero. Like I have an attraction to people, and it's like you said, it's on the gender spectrum. Like if I was attracted to someone non-binary, I would be with them. Like And so the responsibility comes with just making sure that, I guess my mum taught me always stick up for the little person. And the little person isn't always like the smallest, isn't like the tiny person in the room, or it's the person that doesn't really have the voice yet. And I feel like, you know, we didn't really have a queer voice in mainstream telly, especially on franchises like The Bachelorette or Bachelor. And so when I was kind of when that sort of, I guess, mic got handed over to me, I was like, yeah, I'm going to be as loud as I can, because this is my one shot, my one opportunity. And this is my chance to actually show representation and genuine love between people that don't identify as just hetero. Like,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, and that comes with a lot of negative backlash and pressure and responsibility sometimes. But I am so glad that I was actually probably built for this. Like, my mum built me up to be strong, and I'm strong for that because I can just do it. And it does affect me. Mind you, like, opening yourself so like vulnerably all the time, and especially I've done it like a couple of times in the shows, it's nothing quite like opening yourself vulnerably into a book. Like, it's a different experience. And you know, TV makes it very music and theatrical, but you know, a book is just pen to paper, and it's just you and that person, and you're just talking to them, and it's kind of scary. But I think my queerness, like, I actually really love that about myself, because for me, that's like saying, like, I don't see people, you know, I don't confine people to boxes. I see people for all shapes, sizes, textures, colors. Like, I don't really give a shit, like, where you come from. I just love people and being around people. And yeah, and like, yeah, big love is actually just like, I have literally a big love for just people.
Well,
But yeah,
we are actually out of time, but I have absolutely loved talking to you. And if you are interested in learning more about Big Love, or if you'd like me to tell you again in my book, Tell Me Again, you can head to Booktopia's link, which is in their bio, as well as in our bios. And they are having a pretty amazing sale. I had a look. Our books are currently at amazing prices. And mine is a pre-order. So that is a hot price because they're not even on the shelves yet. So please head to the links in the bio if you'd like to buy. But for now, that is everything. Thank you so much, Brooke. Thank you to everyone who joined.
Oh my God, thank you.
Yalu.
Thank you, Amy. Love you so much. Take
Love
care.
you too.
Bye, guys.